This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Methodify by Delvinia. Get real-world customer feedback in hours, not weeks. Schedule your demo and get a free $20 Amazon gift card. Go to methodify.it/BeanCast and Methodify it today. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 596. Silence is not an option. For Monday, June 8th, 2020, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. This week has been both troubling and transformative for the U.S. market. Numerous protests and serious talk about racism have dominated media attention, and brands have attempted to respond. But have they been successful? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, how the ad world has dealt with their own racism this week, a sobering prediction from Forrester, assessing BiliBili, plus this week's Fair, Fail, Foul. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the founder and principal at the Idea Integration Company, Mr. Saul Colt. Hi, Saul.
Hey, Bob. Thanks for having me on the show.
Glad to have you here. Now, next, we welcome back marketing transformation consultant and co-host of podcast Across the Pond, Mr. Samuel Monnie is here. Sam, hi.
Hi, Bob. I am super excited today to be here. Looking forward to this week's show.
Great, so am I. And finally, we have the founder and CEO of influencer marketing agency Sway Group, Ms. Danielle Wiley is here. Danielle, hi, welcome to the program.
Hi there, excited to chat with you.
Well, I've got a lot to chat about tonight. Unfortunately, it's not the usual marketing claptrap that we talk about normally on the show. It's a little bit deeper, a little bit more sobering. This will go down as a momentous week in U.S. history. Anger in the wake of George Floyd's murder ignited massive protests in cities across the U.S. and indeed around the entire world. And it's touched off discussions that reach far beyond the initial focal issue of police brutality aimed at black individuals into the wider impact of racism within the workplace and society in general. Obviously, brands and their agencies are part of this, and we will discuss the internal politics and conversations in the next segment. But first, Saul, let's talk about the outward-facing responses that we saw this week from many brands. First, there's the pullback from all ads. That's one response that people have taken. The next is silence or avoidance. Does that work as a strategy in this circumstance? And of those who spoke up, did any of it seem genuine? I mean, these are real questions, but let's start with the first question that I asked. There's the pullback from advertising. Does silence or avoidance work as a strategy in this circumstance? Do you see it as being a wise decision on the part of a brand to do something like that?
So firstly, I'm in no way happy with what's going on in the world right now, but silver lining, we don't have to talk about programmatic advertising this week. But beyond that, so I've been giving a lot of thought to like what's been going on the last week, last couple of weeks, thinking about this even before I knew I was going to be on the show. My thinking was really around, could a brand say, we don't know what to say right now? And I came to the conclusion that they couldn't. So Nike and Ben & Jerry's came out strong with very powerful statements, and it felt right because it's always been what they've stood for. They've always messaged themselves in this way forever. They were true to their brand, and really the only person I saw that didn't agree with them was Cindy Gallup, and we could talk about that or not talk about that. But some brands were quiet, and I didn't see anything from fast food brands. I didn't see anything from Coke or Pepsi, the soda companies, and I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Well, to be fair, I mean, some fast food brands waded into the fray. I mean, McDonald's was
Popeyes weighed in. I don't know if you guys saw that.
well.
They were
McDonald's
probably
McDonald's weighed in as well. I mean, they.
but Popeyes made a huge snafu. But the point I'm trying to make is brands who haven't supported the Black community in the past, or who don't have activism in their DNA the way Ben and Jerry's does, may have. I think they probably were better off staying quiet in the short term and figure out how to make a meaningful, change in the medium term. It's hard to get it perfect right now, and I think brands really have to. I've seen so many people, brands, media companies, journalists get attacked for saying something that was, it was the wrong thing to say, but it wasn't a huge step over the line and things like that. And, if I was a brand, and we're probably going to talk about this in between topic number 1 or topic number 2, the sponsor of the show, Methodify, I would be testing every message that goes out right now, because it is such a sensitive time. People are deservedly and rightfully on edge. It's so hard to get it right now that you should be really taking a moment to thinking about it. Companies who it's in their DNA, absolutely, go make your statement. It's what you've always done. But companies that don't have this in them, I wouldn't even know what to advise someone to say. And some companies made donations, and some companies have stepped up in a lot of different ways. But I also think that there's going to be a lot of race to diversity and inclusion committees and companies. And Ford, they came out of the news that they want to make a big step forward in listening to their customers. Of course, Ford, of course, has an enormously racist past. They worked with Hitler and basically created the punch card system for voluming and documenting Jews and stuff like that. But times need to change, and hopefully there is some really good things that come out from this. But if your company doesn't have that in your DNA, I'm not even sure where you would start.
Can I jump in there, Bob?
Yeah, go for it.
So, as I was listening there, from my perspective, clearly, I have a lens which says, of course, you've got to say something. And as a marketer, I would have said, you've always got to say something. And I would advise companies I've worked with and have worked for to say something. And something very interesting came up in this week when I saw there's some data out there from Morning Consult. They did some survey data, and it was basically net favorability about this issue. And the conclusion data showed that if no official statement from a brand led to a negative sentiment, negative favorability. So I think when I'm looking at it, it's all adults, it was a -7, white adults -7, and then Black adults -10. So
can I ask a question about that data real quick, and just to frame your conversation a little bit more closely? I believe the statistics that saying nothing causes an unfavorability rating, but compare that or contrast that to saying the wrong thing.
Yeah, and that's the point. So there's data that says you have to say something. Saying nothing is a bad option. It may not be the worst option, because if you come out in favor of the KKK or something, then probably you're going to go even further. But saying nothing leads to a bad result. So that for me brings tears to my eyes. I mean, I'm sort of euphoric about that, because now you have to participate. You have to step into the arena. But as you're right there, Bob, there's data that says if there's different sentiment between the different groups. So if you said something that's a statement that supported the police, it was +13 for white adults and a -23 for Black adults. If you said a statement supporting protesters, it was a -1 for white adults and a +28 for Black adults. Statements sort of saying invest in the community or to support businesses were positive for all people. Statements for diversity training was positive. So there are things you can actually say, but you've got to lead with I think a moral agenda, and you've got to lead in a way that actually forces you to do the right thing. And so for me, I'm quite excited that there's a backlash for saying nothing, which I think a lot of CEOs and CMOs would have, and PR leaders would have actually counseled and advised their people to do. And I think for me, one of the reasons I created, my podcast was because I wanted to have a voice and be able to encourage and coach and, inspire marketers to actually take the modern marketing stance. And now we're seeing that in this issue at this time, stepping into the crucible of purpose, which was fluffy, and social cause, tree hugging stuff in the past about the environment. Now you have to do something. And many brands have done it well. And I think I heard about Ben and Jerry's, which they kind of called it white supremacy, and dismantling that was their issue, and how to frame that and bringing that terms into the public domain. And then Nike, which did get criticism because people are now linking what you say to your organization, or maybe we'll talk a bit more about that later. But if you've got no board, or 2 black board members, or 2 or 3, and no executives in your organization, it kind of rings hollow. Bank of America said, okay, we're going to, I think, invest $1 billion over 4 years. And Verizon, $10 million they're going to invest. And I think Lego said, look, let's not start advertising police stuff and White House buildings. And then you've got people like Microsoft, and I think McCann came out and said, hey, let's put a mural on the store which has been boarded up, but let's do it before this story is no longer relevant. And that got leaked, and now you've had the CEO of McCann apologize and the CEO of Microsoft apologize for the insensitivity, because the agency was trying to say, let's do it quick so we can capitalize on it. So I think there are ways to do it right and ways to do it wrong, but saying nothing is not an option according to the data, which I love. For me, it's not an opinion, it's actually data driven.
Well, luckily, I was going to say, luckily we have a PR expert here with us, so I'd love to hear your opinions, Danielle.
So it's interesting for us because we're not only dealing with our paying clients, the brands and the agencies, but we also have a network of over 30,000 influencers. They all paused their sponsored content last week. And as Thursday, Friday rolled around and folks started preparing for next week, this coming week, we got this huge influx of emails from the influencers wanting to confirm that the brands that they were going to be writing about had made a statement, and wanting to ensure that they felt aligned with that. I just don't think it's acceptable anymore to be silent and to not have a perspective. It's expected by the influencers that the brands they work for have a perspective, and I think it's increasingly expected by consumers as well.
Isn't there, like, we're speaking in absolutes? Like, there's a lot of brands, like, I think this is really more of a relevancy issue, and we probably internalize this to the brands we care about. I could be wrong. You guys correct me. I haven't seen the NBA make a comment. I haven't seen Major League Baseball have a comment on this. The only news coming out of NBA and Major League Baseball are that, hey, the season's going to start in, NBA, we're getting back to our season, and we're going to pretend like the world is exactly the way it was, and Corona's over, kind of thing. Major League Baseball, I haven't seen make a comment on this. There's a lot of brands, like, do I really need Marriott Hotels to have a comment right now when they probably employ so many undocumented workers and pay them next to nothing, and aren't probably necessarily very good to the visible minority communities and things like that. Like, I agree with you guys, and I'm half playing devil's advocate and half trying to understand for myself. But there's plenty of people that I didn't see make a comment, and in some ways, so I mentioned Popeyes earlier. I dug it up while you guys were chatting, and they tweeted, and I'm not a person of color, and this offended me. They tweeted, Popeyes is nothing without Black lives. That seems super borderline racist to me. A lot of people took it as a joke, and there was a lot of memes that came out of it. Maybe it's, sort of getting back to the point I was making. If I'm offended by this and I'm not a person of color, I'm not sure how anybody could really understand what is okay to say right now, because there's just so many different levels of people that are, emotionally connected or aggravated or personally connected to tragedies and things like that. That, even if you had people of color at your executive level of the decision making, it still may not be the right decision. Like, people are human, no matter what, and that's sort of how if we weren't human, we wouldn't be even talking about being upset and making the wrong decisions and things like that.
I think just because some folks say the wrong thing isn't necessarily a reason to say that people shouldn't be, or companies, brands shouldn't be saying anything at all.
I'd echo that. Absolutely. And I think this is where being human, the silence is deafening. The silence is deafening. And I think you mentioned the NBA. The NBA has been a leader in this space for years. And so they're so tight with their community, with their, with their players and with the management. And so when you had a racist owner who made racist statements, they found a very quick way to get him out of the league. And I think there's a documentary coming up.
So I'm a big NBA fan. I wouldn't say it was quick. Donald Sterling was a racist forever. I think that was really more player driven than league driven. I think they embarrassed the league into it, just like Roger Goodell was embarrassed into making the apology the other day. And like, if you really want to nitpick, you could almost say that you could trace some of this right back to the NFL. If they had just treated Colin Kaepernick with a little bit of respect, we probably wouldn't be in the position we are now, or at least not to the degree we're in the position with public sentiment. There's certainly still going to be, I'm not blaming the NFL for underlying racism, throughout globally, but like you could say that was one of the trigger points. The complete reluctance to face it and to do anything. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just being a jerk. I want sincerity in my messaging. I don't want people to be guilted and embarrassed into making messages.
Well, there's an argument to be made that this is a time for people who have been on the forefront of these issues to make their statements, and for those companies that have been woefully behind in making these statements of support, it's time for you to just express that you're listening and that you're paying attention. And that's all you have to do. You don't have to make some sweeping statement about how you support Black Lives Matter if you don't feel like your company can withstand the PR backlash from something like that. But you can say, we're listening, we're aware, we're humbly listening. And it's just like, why not? Why not come out and say that?
That's where empathy comes in. And everyone was talking when COVID was going on. And so that's the lens I apply here. Is like, you're sending me emails, you feel free to fill my inbox and say a lot of things and put ads on when COVID is happening. Now you've lost your tongue. And so there is a lack of sincerity if you were talking last week and now you've stopped because you've got nothing to say. You've got something to say, you just don't want to say it. And I think consumers are smart, but a key stakeholders is not only consumers and investors, it's employees. So if you're working for a company and you don't know where they stand, or they don't want to say anything out loud, or there's shenanigans behind the scenes as to what they're going to say, that says it all. So if you're a CEO or a leader of a company right now, and or a brand, you're having, because I'm talking to a lot of my Black friends and colleagues internally, and the nonsense they're having to put up with because companies are putting out insensitive statements, off statements, pointless statements, because they just don't get it and they can't. But they have people inside who could help them, but also they haven't done the work in the past. So this is exposing, and I think maybe in the next topic will come, this is exposing a lot of the challenges organizations have. But you got to face it sometime. You got to pull up your big boy and big adult pants and just face it, because you cannot hide from this issue anymore. And I think for people of color, for obviously right now, Black people, I mean, I'm also very empathetic right now for the LGBTQ community, because June was Pride Month. And so I've seen a lot of great work from those communities supporting this issue, because Pride Month it shouldn't be forgotten. Obviously, we're not saying, Black lives are more important than Pride, but this is an example where those communities have rallied around. So I'm seeing a lot of positivity, because it took companies a long time to support Pride, but now Pride is so much more established. I think this is an issue now that all companies have to say something about, and the ones who screw up hopefully will pick themselves up and get better. But saying nothing, as I say, it's not even my opinion. The data says saying nothing is bad for your P&L.
What about the idea of ponying up money? I mean, Danielle, maybe you can give some perspective on this because, the idea seems like it's a good idea on first glance. You're going to give a big donation to one of the groups involved with the protest or activists, individual activists, etc. Some of them seemed very genuine. Like there was the beauty care company that was Black founded. It's just like that effort made a lot of sense. It was very genuine. Other efforts seemed a little bit more shallow. What's the rule about that? Is just any money is good money if it's going to the right cause? Danielle? Well, maybe it's one of the other guys. Danielle's.
I think any money is good money if it's going to the right cause. I would say though that again, it goes back to like your belief system and your ideologies. I welcome every brand to make donations to charities, to forward movements. I don't want brands to think that it's a get out of jail free card going forward, that they can just, this is their way to deal with everything. Like I'd rather they set up real change and real programs and all sorts of things. Like, I keep going back to Nike. Nike, the global brand, committed $40 million to Black education and Black charities. And then Jordan brand, which is the sub brand of Nike. A lot of people don't realize it's a different company, which, Michael Jordan is the CEO. They've committed $100 million. So, Nike's essentially committed $140 million over the next 10 years, which is incredible. And, they would probably have done a less high amount on their own without everything that's going on. So, like I said, that's part of their DNA. It makes perfect sense. But companies with horrible histories of treating Black people or just treating people in general, I don't want them to think that they can just make a donation and pat themselves on the back and things like that. Like there has to be real change, otherwise the protests don't stop and the people don't feel like there's been any, they've been seen or heard or identified. So yes, money is great. Please keep funneling money, but I hope that there's real change done with the money because man, we need it.
Well, and I don't think it can be just a one-time donation. I think there has to be an ongoing commitment, and to Saul's point, I think it needs to really be in line with how you've acted previously.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, it's just like, I think that's the difference between disingenuous giving and stuff that comes off as very genuine and authentic. It comes down to how consistent have you been? I mean, I'm a big believer in consistency when it comes to branding, when it comes to podcasting, when it comes to your social giving or whatever you're involved with. I mean, consistency matters more than anything. And companies can't expect to just throw money at the problem and expect it to go away. It needs to be a consistency that you're putting behind this and a commitment to go forward with continual giving.
Yeah, and I think we talk about consistency. That's why I call out Ben and Jerry, yes, the ice cream brand. And they tell the story of how they were, when they were founded, one of them had a criminal record and they managed to get a loan. It's just because they were two white guys, and they freely admit that if they'd been Black, there's no chance that they would have been given such a light treatment when they were in that situation, and they would definitely have not been lent any money. And so that privilege they've talked about for years and years and years. They've been arrested when protesting marriage equality a couple of years ago. So when they come out saying, they want to, their mission is to help dismantle white supremacy, there's a consistent track record that the purpose and these social causes and social good and the prosperity of their employees, of their suppliers, and of the world has always been important to them. So again, all of that stuff has always been there, and they've taken a stance on on Black Lives Matter. They've been supporting them for years, openly and publicly, when other people call them a terrorist organization. And so when they come out, it's easier for them to say more and do more and have credibility. But you've got to start somewhere. So if you've got zero credibility, time to start paying and building it up over time and being consistent. And I think people now will hold you accountable, and they will call you out, and they will shine a light on the situation a lot faster. And so the challenge right now is, because we are in a bit of an era of cancel culture, so saying the wrong thing will get a backlash, but have a good intent and fix it and learn and listen and move forward. But as I say, saying nothing is saying everything. And right now, if you're a CEO, CMO, and and Danielle's been talking about how the influencers are looking for it, you can't expect to say nothing and get away with it. There may be a few brands which play in a category that fine, they maybe perhaps they can stay out of it. But I cannot see a scenario. And again, this is very US centric. But guess what? There are protests around the world. UK, New Zealand, Oslo apparently has had its biggest protest ever in the history of Norway this week. So South Asia, Africa. So the world is up in arms. So this is a global issue centered in the US. You can't even hide from it, because some companies say, oh, it's just a US thing. And now the UK is kicking off. Now they're having to react to the fact that they didn't want to say anything because it was a US thing, but now it's a global thing. They look worse. So it's multidimensional.
Well, we're going to continue this conversation and talk more about the internal issues that went on this week at ad agencies and among brands, offices, and ad tech companies. But before we do that, it's time to talk about our sponsor, Methodify by Delvinia, and give you or someone you know another chance to get a $20 Amazon gift card just for checking them out. Now, behind every brand are real people just like you, or just like your coworkers, or just like employees, making decisions that are going to be important for your brand overall. And if you're all making those decisions right now, and you're doing so while in a stressful situation, talking about protests, talking about COVID, talking to consumers who are also dealing with these issues, highly stressed and highly sensitive, you say one wrong thing in that situation and your advertising could unleash a social media firestorm against your brand. This is not something that you need. And this is where our sponsor, Methodify by Delvinia, can help you. Methodify collects real feedback from your actual customers on concepts or creative before you release it to the world. And the whole process takes hours. I said that right, hours, not days. Methodify gives insight professionals and senior marketing people the information they need to power better decisions that will protect their brands and themselves. Now, Methodify has been used to test digital creative for a number of brands in lots of different categories during this pandemic, all to make sure their ad messaging wasn't tone deaf. Now, it was invaluable information for all of these companies, and Methodify can do the same for you. Actual customer feedback is a game changer, because right now, brands that wait and see, sit on the sidelines just waiting and seeing, are going to wind up making costly mistakes. Now, connect with your customers. We want you to do that. We want you to build relationships. Do that too. Build trust, build fans, but test everything. And Methodify can get you started today. Now, to find out more about Methodify and to set up a demo, just Methodify it. Go to methodify.it/BeanCast. That's methodify.it/BeanCast. And as a way of saying thanks, every BeanCast listener who signs up and completes a demo is going to receive a $20 Amazon gift card just for your time. And don't keep this information to yourself. Don't give this offer just to your inbox and let it go. I mean, you want to make sure that everybody knows about this, because this can seriously help out associates, friends, people you know in business, people who are clients, people who are employees, people who are just tangentially involved with you at work. Anybody can take advantage of this and make sure that their ads are saying the right thing when they go out. So again, that address is methodify.it/BeanCast, and we thank them very much for their support of our program. Well, the internal picture at agencies, brands, media outlets, and tech companies mirrored society as a whole this past week. Some organizations have a solid history of dealing with the issues, and they did pretty well. Others tried to voice their support only to be called to task for past behavior, something we've already addressed a little bit of, while still others refused to acknowledge the protests and/or problems altogether. Sam, what is the one thing every organization should be doing now at a minimum? I think you kind of hit it on the head. They should be making a statement, but what else should they be doing?
Well, I'll start off my, I was going to say rant, but, plea maybe, to say that I love marketing and advertising, despite the fact that they both break my heart every day. I'm in the marketing transformation, marketing capability space, because I actually believe that you can make things better. You can grow and develop people. You can grow and build organizations. But certainly marketing, advertising, I will quote Cindy Gallop because she says, look, advertising is white guys talking to white guys about other white guys. And at this point in time, I thought, well, okay, get off your soapbox, do some research. So as I started researching, I started looking at organizations that are representative of the industry. Who would we look to in the industry itself just to say, hey, who can help us be good at this, and who could perhaps steward the way? And so I looked at people like the ANA, Association of National Advertisers, IAB, 4As. I think I looked at a company called Brand Innovators who bring marketers together. So all of these organizations, and they've got advisory boards, or they've got various committees, and these committees that are dealing with talent or data, they have team leaders. I looked at World Federation of Advertisers, and they had a multitude of different people, over 40 people. So 132 people in all of these committees, boards, advisories for all of these organizations, 3 black people. I'll cut to the chase, 3 black people. So you've only got 3 out of 132 in the industry bodies making decisions. You've got no dice. And I think what's happened in a lot of these organizations is that they've focused on diversity and not actual specifics. And so, for example, the ANA, their CMO circle organization, the Master Circle, they've got 28 people, 60% of who are female, but not one single black person who's got a seat at that table to help set the direction for that organization. But as you said, this mirrors society in other industries. So in CVS, in healthcare, CVS doesn't have any black people. The tech companies, Facebook, Google's, and all, they don't have any black people. Finance, I think a few of them, B of A and a few others, don't have any black people. So the industry mirrors the associations. And so one thing you can do is take seriously the capabilities of building people. And so I wrote a blog post called Sorry, Simon Sinek, Start with the How, Not the Why. So he's very famous, Golden Circles, 12 million YouTube views, bunch of books sold about focus on the why. And I'm saying focus on the how, because the how is the part where you actually start to cultivate empathy. You start to put people first. You start to focus on building capability. You start to focus on peer-to-peer coaching within the organization. You start to let go of the P&L as the first thing and actually focused on people. You have leaders who are prepared to be vulnerable and candid and say, I don't get it, or help me learn. So those are all capabilities and behaviors and mindsets that come from actually focusing and investing in your marketing capabilities, marketing capacity, skills. And if you start there and make it a thing, and I'll build on that by saying that means that the Antonio Lucios, Fermachados, all the CMOs at these companies, it is your responsibility to take the reins as someone who's supposed to be driving growth and be close to your consumers. Take the ownership to help your organization be better, because you're the one putting out the bad ads or the bad statements, because your leaders cannot do it. And I think CMOs can be placed if they actually invest in the people stuff, help build those capabilities and lead the rest of the organization through it. And as a marketer, I've done a lot of that work through actually partnering with our D&I teams and partnering with the diversity people and actually co-creating and repositioning. So the last company I was at, Campbell Soup, I actually partnered with Elizabeth Morrison, who's the head of D&I, and we rebranded the Affinity Network, and it was called Campbell Identity, Elevating Culture and Consciousness. And that whole premise was about the identity part, but we used UWG, Uniworld Group. And that was founded by Byron Lewis, the first African-American multicultural owned agency in America. And they helped create this new branding and this new positioning. And I tell that story because it was about having marketing actually leading and not letting other functions and other parts of the C-suite have their say. So don't let legal suppress the data. Don't let HR water it down. Don't let comms. Marketing can actually be the leader in making this happen.
You know, one of the most troubling things, first of all, your points are well taken. There's so much depth and understanding of what's wrong with the the world, and when we're looking at the raw numbers of people and representation. And it's just, people can say it's a minority group, that of course there would be fewer people from that minority group on those boards. But when you look at the statistics, it's well below the representation in society. And it's just like, and that's the big problem overall. I wrote a stupid question down in my show notes, which is fixing the problem a matter of simply fixing the problem? And really, when you think about it, that's what it comes down to. It's not a matter of what you say. It's not a matter of how you say it. It's a matter of just do it. Just make a move toward bringing representation into all parts of society. And that's how this problem gets fixed. Danielle?
And I think it's also about understanding what the problem is. I love that I love, Sam, how you're tying it all back to data, because I think sometimes the first step is just looking at what those numbers are, setting a benchmark and seeing where you need to make a change and where you're lacking. So whether it's looking at the makeup of your speakers, if you're running a conference, looking at the makeup of your board, looking at the makeup of the influencers we put onto a campaign, sometimes just looking at what those numbers are and seeing where you need to make a difference is a great first step for anyone.
And, it also comes down to, I think preconceived notions. I mean, one of the things that comes up again and again inside advertising agencies, that's been my own experience, is that when you're dealing with a person of color, especially when you're dealing with an African American, you have this immediate drive toward people saying, it's just like, well, we don't need them on this because it's not an urban campaign or something like that. I mean, the implicit racism that goes on within society is something that needs to be addressed as well. I mean, it's just these preconceived notions are, driving us to the bottom. Saul, what's your thoughts on how the odd world needs to respond from this point going forward? I mean, what's the next step that we need to take?
I don't know, because I honestly think we know what we need to do. We know what's going to make it better. The piece of the puzzle we don't have is how to actually make it happen. We can protest and we can boycott and we can do all these things, but how many white CEOs are going to step down? Of course, we saw Alexis Ohanian step down from his board seat the other day. That's incredible, and it's a huge step, and it's something really amazing. But he's a unique guy in a very unique and interesting situation. I don't know how many people are going to I don't know. I think we all know what needs to be done. There should be more women in board seats. There should be more people of all diverse backgrounds in board seats, because companies need different influences to sustain and be great. But even people who are financially set for the rest of their life, I can't see their egos allowing them, and I'm not in that position, so I can't speak from a position of knowledge. But I think if you could anyone see I'm blanking on his name, Tesla guy.
Oh, Elon.
Let's not go after Elon Musk, because he does have a rather large ego. Let's lead with, I kind of, as I said, my blog post, start with the how, not the why. There's tips on there, there's specifics on there, leading with empathy. So on Monday, Tuesday, whatever the day you're listening to this podcast, give yourself a one day, write 3 things you can do as a leader. If you're a brand manager, whether you're a marketing director, whether you're a CMO, whether you're a CEO, there's 3 things you can do. Then put down a check in 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. What have you done? Now, I teed off my part by calling out the data. The ANA Master Circle, 0 team leaders out of 28 people who are responsible for talent and organization, data, brand experience, social social responsibility. 28 people on those team leader positions. 0 today. What's it going to be in 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? Come to 180 days, 365 days. If it's still 0 black people, when you've just, well, actually, they haven't come out with a statement on Black Lives Matter, actually. The 4As have, but ANA hasn't yet. So 365 days, if nothing's happened, just disband. Shut yourself down, because you're irrelevant. Because there has to be some tension in the system. How can you represent the industry when we're saying this is the biggest, most important thing, and 0 of the people in those teams, and again, I know there's other parts of the ANA, there's probably are black people, but we have to change the ratio. We have to change those numbers. And if you choose not to, then you should close down. You should be defunded. Why would companies invest in or sponsor or pay their dues to these organizations which don't represent the general population? We know the marketing industry is underrepresented with minorities, especially black leaders. So they're in a tough spot because there aren't that many black CMOs because of other institutional issues. But if you're making it worse and there's no concerted effort to make it better, then what we should do, you should close your organization down. You should resign. And that sounds very, very provocative, but Alexis Ohanian from Reddit is already role modeling the behavior to say, you know what, let's actively use that position I've resigned from and find a candidate. Because you know what, there are loads of them out there. And I think the thing which agitates the friends I've been speaking with in organizations, the bias in the system, which means unqualified people get promoted ahead of you, the boys club network that gets opportunities, the lack of mentorship, the lack of support, the lack of investment and resources. There's a lack of effort to develop and coach and motivate people, coach and develop people. So my whole marketing transformation, marketing capability is about investing in people. So if you're mindful and purposeful about developing and growing people, you will have an abundant resource pool of people who could fill that role. But if you're not making any effort, so I'm calling out the WFA, ANA, and 4As, they're not making any effort. Now the challenge is, what happens when you do? Because I am convinced you can make progress and you can be better if you set your mind to it. And my provocation is they have chosen not to. Well, the how is out there. The how is absolutely accessible. What will you do day 1, day 7, day 14, day 30? And I'm happy to help. Ping me, reach out to me. This is not only a race thing. This is if I anchor it, as I've said, in marketing transformation, marketing capabilities, there's stuff you can be doing tomorrow which will help you be better.
Well, all of the above may be moot for most of us because if Forrester research is correct, you'll probably be out of a job by 2021 anyway. The consultancy projects over 50,000 agency jobs will be cut over the next 2 years. How is that for a segue into another topic? But by the way, those were really great points there, Sam, that you ended on. Danielle, is this a problem that can even be fixed? Is this something that we can even address? Or is this just foregone conclusion that we're going to lose the 50,000 and we just got to make do with what we got?
Yeah, I don't see it being fixed, not to be the bummer. But, agencies are bloated. There's giant production budgets that no longer make any sense given the technology that's out there. I mean, we have influencers at the cost of $1,000, $2,000 creating videos of the quality of videos that cost 10, 20 times that, if not more. I think we've seen with COVID, the amount of overhead being wasted on office space that we've now realized is not necessary. There's just so much bloating and unnecessary spending in the agency space given new technology. I think these cuts are inevitable. I don't see it changing, and I don't know that we'd want to change it. I mean, so much of these costs are, from my perspective, ridiculous.
Well, but going by that, if they cut out, commercial real estate and they cut out, a lot of the bloated things, there's other ways to cut money without slashing 50,000 jobs. Like there's ways. I think that these cuts if they do come. And I've said this many times, and I even thought about this at the beginning of all the furloughs and layoffs to do with COVID. They were largely more about preserving lifestyles than preserving lives. And lifestyles, I mean by the people at the top who, it's like, oh, well, we got to cut somebody. Let's just cut the bottom 10% of everybody in this operation.
Yeah, but that's that's not what's happening though, because the bottom 10%.
This week with Edelman, I mean, they laid off 7% of the staff. I think it was 390 people, and it wasn't just the bottom. I mean, there were some.
Yeah, it's very much an expansion of ageism, which is another big issue that advertising faces on an ongoing basis. I mean, it's a great cost-setting move, cost-saving move to cut out a layer of mid-management to upper management who's high-paying, getting a little older, get rid of them, go down to the young people, give them a nice juicy promotion, and you can still get the work done. Maybe not as well, but you can still get the work done.
And what's interesting too, I think, I mean, this news is a couple weeks old, but with Facebook's announcement that they were going to let people continue to work from home, but then Zuckerberg followed it up by stating that they were going to localize the salaries as of January 2021. It's just some of these cost-cutting measures are very, very interesting. You're going to see people making the decision to move somewhere less expensive out of a big city and then suddenly get their salary slashed because they've decided to, move back to Michigan or Oklahoma, wherever they're from.
Yeah, very good point. I mean, there's a lot of things at play all at once here that will kind of mitigate some of this and cause a lot of headaches for a lot of employees. Are the cuts necessary to preserve the business or just another step in its destruction? I mean, talk to me, Sam, about this, because in some ways I feel, well, 50,000, that's a lot. But when you actually crunch the numbers, it's not a huge percentage of the total workforce. It's a lot of people, but it's not a huge percentage. It's a reasonable percentage, and the business is under a lot of pressure right now from a lot of different quarters. We've listed them all on this show many times before. I don't need to go through that, but are cuts like this just necessary in order to save the business?
Well, I am the annoying leader when these discussions are happening, and I love fighting with the CFO and these organizations. I love fighting about the P&L because the fundamental way most companies look at the P&L is broken. And if it's all about SG&A and there's just numbers and getting to a percentage versus sales or percentage versus advertising, you're doomed, because all you're looking at is efficiency. And my whole shtick is about effectiveness. So if you have a P&L, which I've seen a lot of companies have, their profit and loss says, we have to reduce non-working media. And non-working media is bad because we're just paying people to produce stuff. And in 2020, when we've just been talking a lot about influencers and content, guess what non-working media is? That's all your content that you're saying you're trying to reduce the cost of. So you're cutting in the wrong place in the wrong way. And I've had stand-up fights with CFOs because the P&L, which was built, balance sheet, all of those numbers which are built from the 40s or 50s, that way of managing a business is so screwed. It's all about efficiency and not about effectiveness. So if you're about making people better or changing your ways of working, so you're agile and you're A/B testing and you're just producing things on the fly, you don't need the big production system. You can actually think differently about how you're structured. COVID has forced companies to realize that they've built all these shiny headquarters. And again, I'm probably not going to get invited to them again, but I remember going to France. I went to the, which agency? Actually, I've forgotten the agency, so that probably spare them. And I'm going to their agency for the first time. I'm in Paris, going to the offices, driving through the airport, going up the Champs-Élysées. And guess what? They have a stunning view of overlooking the Champs-Élysées in Paris. You don't need the most expensive real estate in New York or the most expensive real estate in London or the rest. So there's baked in inefficiency, but they're not looking to cut that. COVID has forced you to realize that you can work in a very different way, effective, collaboratively, less hierarchy, focusing on the real challenges, using the talent and the abilities of the people. The person closest to the data can actually influence what goes live instead of building that stupid deck for 3 weeks to try and persuade the CMO to make the right move. Now you can bypass all of that bureaucracy and pivot, because now you can make ads on your phone and put them on air, even though some of them look horrible. Then now people are being creative using these like Teams and WebEx type ads and going to air. Why would you need your big Hollywood production, expensive yachts to create ads if you can find a way to communicate on TV advertising in a much more effective way, as well as an efficient way? So my plea, invite me to your boardroom. I will fight with your CFO for you. If you're a CMO who's scared, I will fight that fight, because you need to be a warrior for effectiveness, for advocacy, for engagement. Those drivers of marketing and advertising will mean that you're actually keeping people and doing different things than purely going to cutting the heads and hitting a number and still not winning the business. Agencies have to innovate. And there is a lot of opportunity to innovate. And there are a lot of innovative agency models coming up and coming out of different communities, because they're not vested in the status quo. So I'm excited by the industry pivoting. And we just talked earlier about ways that they can do that. You put that together in this, there are so many beautiful ways that the agency can recover, but not in the traditional way, trying to pay the rent on the Champs-Élysées legacy property, which is stupid because people can't visit and travel it anyway.
Yeah, you know where a company stands based on what they spend their money on. I mean, I think that's pretty much the truth that we can all live by. We're running out of time, so I want to hit this last topic real quick. Exactly what you were hoping for, another video sharing platform. BiliBili is often called China's answer to YouTube, but what's making some luxury brand marketers salivate is the engagement and responsiveness of the platform. Danielle, is there room for another such platform here in the West? And is it even meant for the West? Is it just that it's doing really well in the East? And is it worth our attention and investment, especially if we're in the luxury marketing space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen it with TikTok, right? I think just because something starts in the East doesn't mean it's not going to suddenly become hugely relevant in the West. And I'm seeing a lot of frustration. I think we all are with Facebook. Instagram is somehow floating above the fray, but we can't forget that it's owned by Facebook, and the backlash is going to come. And I think consumers, especially young ones, are looking for other options. And just like with TikTok has been a great way to reach Gen Z, BiliBili is the same way. I think there's absolutely room for something new.
Now, I read this article pretty closely, yet I was still confused as to why luxury marketers are particularly into it. Is it just that they have the right types of people getting involved with putting videos on this platform, or is there something specific about the platform that makes it very good for a luxury marketer?
I think it's the... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer, so if you have one.
All right, well, I think it's solely based on geography. So whether this would work in the West is immaterial, because it is working in the East. When COVID started and factories were shut down, Porsche, the car manufacturer, they shut down production for the first time in something like 40 or 50 years or something like that. And the only orders that were still coming in for custom spec'd out 911s were from China. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the area and to know, why that's the case, but it's like the luxury market is alive and well. I think in North America we're going to see a very different luxury market. It's going to, talk about retail having to reinvent themselves. Luxury market's going to have to reinvent yourself, because luxury clothing is all about validation from other people. And if we're wearing masks for the foreseeable future, and we're restricting to a certain extent how often we go out, do we really need, $7,000 sweaters and things like that? I think there's going to be a different change. But in China, luxury is booming beyond imagination. So, this is kind of the right time, right place for this application right now.
Well, with that, it's time for the fair, fail, foul. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do some shameless plugs. Starting with Saul Colt, you can find him at theideaintegration.com. That's the home of his agency, The Idea Integration Company. It's also the way that you can get in touch with him. It's a way that you can read his many, many thoughts and opinions. You can get on his newsletter. Tell us what's going on in your world. Saul, what would you like to promote?
I've got a couple personal content things coming up in the next little while that hopefully guys will take a look at. From a professional standpoint, I have a big announcement coming in about 2 weeks. So the whole downturn where I was sitting around looking at myself is hopefully over. But as far as personal, I've started been doing a podcast for a long time called We Now Join the Program Already in Progress. Bob was a guest on the show, and if you're interested in hearing 40 plus interviews, long form interviews with me and people I admire, you can go to Saul Talks, SAULTLAKS. I've also turned it into a Facebook Live show where I do once or twice a week at 11 a.m. on Facebook Live. And this Monday is really exciting. There's no theme to my show. It's just people who I want to talk with who are interesting. So sometimes it's business, sometimes it's marketing, sometimes it's entertainment. And tomorrow or Monday, whenever you listen to the show, I'm going to be talking with Bill Boggs. Bill Boggs, of course, if you grew up in the 80s or 90s, would know Bill Boggs as kind of like, he was the guy who interviewed every major celebrity from Sinatra to Burt Reynolds to Richard Pryor to Betty White. And I'm going to be picking his brain on celebrity stories and his career. And an interesting little note that he was, one of the first producers of the Morton Downey Jr. show, which was sadly something really important to me when I was in high school. Besides that, and getting back to the first topic about, Black Lives Mattered and should you say anything, before all the protests started, I partnered with Planned Parenthood and Charity Buzz to do an auction. You can actually be a guest on my show if you bid on the auction, and all the money goes to Planned Parenthood. I don't even know if it's okay to promote other charities right now because we're all sort of focused on Black Lives Matter, which is a good thing. But if you guys have an interesting story, you're a business person, you're a company, you're a brand, or just somebody who just wants to be on a reasonably popular podcast, and you're cool with making a donation to a charity that I think is doing really wonderful things, you can go to CharityBuzz.com and just search my name and make a donation. I was worried that nobody would bid on it, but there's about 5 bids and it closes in 2 days, so at the very least it's not embarrassing. And if you just want to reach out to me about work, I have a very sliver of bandwidth left. Please go to theideaintegration.com. Thank you.
Fantastic. Next up, we have Sam Monnie. You can find him at marketingtransformed.com. That's the home of both his consultancy and his podcast, Across the Pond. Tell us what's going on in your world, Sam. What would you like to promote?
Well, the shameless plug moment is here. So I plugged myself a few times, but there's that podcast, there's that blog post I mentioned. Start with the how, not the why. So there's sorry, Simon Sinek, start with how, not why. You can find that on the Marketing Transformed website, or you can find that on LinkedIn as well. So if you hit me up, Samuel Monnie, find me on LinkedIn, you could read the blog post, and all the tips inside are free, but the work is going to be hard and more costly. The other thing, as you've mentioned a few times, Across the Pond Marketing Transformed, which is a marketing podcast I do with a buddy who's based in the UK, Chris Lawson. So we are literally across the pond, and the unique selling proposition for this show is that you don't only get one, you get 2 British accents for about 25-30 minutes talking all things marketing. So check us out at marketingtransformed.com. And as I said, we are super jazzed about the show, and actually in a couple of weeks there's some new news. We're about to announce season 4. We're just closing out season 3 of the show, and some a relaunch is about to happen, so I'm super excited for that. And we just love the support. Hit me up on social media. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram partially. I will hold my tongue on Facebook because I think we're going to talk about them, so yeah, perhaps don't reach out to me on that because I'm not a fan.
Yeah, Facebook. Oh, man. And last but not least, Danielle Wiley. You can find her at swaygroup.com. That's the home of her agency, the Sway Group, which is an influencer. It's an agency of sorts, right? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about it, and what would you like to promote?
Yeah, so we are an influencer marketing agency. We have been around for over 9 years. And as I mentioned, we have a diverse network of over 30,000 influencers. Um, we pride ourselves on being very involved and full service with the work that we do, which leads to engagement rates that are 2 to 3 times the industry average, and we're really proud of that. In terms of what I want to plug, what we've been doing a lot lately, we have amazing processes and just an awesome team, and we can pull together programs really, really quickly, which um, has been very useful lately, as we have a lot of clients who've had to suddenly pivot huge portions of their budget that were going towards initiatives that are no longer happening due to COVID. And the other thing I'd like to plug is I just had an article come out in Forbes about diversity, the importance of diversity within influencer marketing. Came out a few weeks ago, but it's just becoming more and more relevant by the day. And if folks want to check that out, you can probably find it just searching Danielle Wiley, Forbes diversity. I'm guessing that would work.
Fantastic. Yeah, there's a lot of great content coming out from your agency and from you. And I'm really glad that you were on the program today. Thank you for joining the panel. It's fantastic to have you a part of it. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive, find out how to consult with me about getting your brand's podcast off the ground, and even how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for this week's Fair, Fail, Foul, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, Facebook employees staged a walkout, a virtual walkout, Sam, to protest inaction on Trump's inflammatory posts. Trump was just in rare form this week, and the social network continued to hold the line that they were not going to edit anything that was said by the president. The company disagrees with him. I give them a lot of credit. I call this a fair that the company stood up against the CEO and said, we don't want this to be a part of our network.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a walkout. I would call it a down tools, because clearly if everyone's remote, they weren't walking out anywhere. They just weren't showing up or picking up.
Yeah, virtual is what I said.
And as I think about it, I think when I read into this, Trump called Zuckerberg on the Friday, and he's still holding the line. So I just sigh when it comes to Facebook, because you'd like to think they'd be the better angel, but when you look at all the data and the leadership, it's I'm sure I know people there who I love. I just find it hard to support them and the choices that they make, because they just seem to be the wrong side of culture and the wrong side of history from my personal perspective.
But Bob,
so I support the workers.
Bob, you nailed it on the head by calling them the social network, because, Zuck, as he asks me to call him, he's been very, very steady over many years and many interviews saying they're not a news outlet. Mm-hmm. And I think they him and Sheryl Sandberg live in fear of ever being classified as a news outlet, mm-hmm. because then they would be open to communication standards, exactly. and fines, of course. So they're gonna go down with this whoever it hurts, because they don't want to be held to any accountability of any kind by government. So are they making the right decision? Not the one I agree with, but they're certainly being very, very steady to what they've always said for many years.
Well, did I mention the Trump campaign was in rare form this past week? Trump campaign gets a takedown notice from NASA, Danielle. I mean, it's just like NASA has some very strict guidelines on how you can use their imagery. And the campaign just kind of took it all and used it as being all about Trump. This one was, for me, both funny and also very, very sad.
Yeah, I mean, it was nice to see that the ads got taken down and that they followed up on that. What I noticed first was the fact that he used his campaign playlist as the soundtrack for the launch. It's a huge conflict of interest, and I'd call that a fail as well. I think you're spot on.
I just love the fact that the slogan was "Make Space Great Again," because last time I was in space, I thought, yeah, space isn't really doing a good job. Let's make it great. So I just think that slogan alone was the funniest SNL parody that we have to see happen in real life.
Reminds me of Space Force. If you haven't seen that Netflix show, you should.
This is like this life imitating art, imitating life, actually, but it's real yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very funny. Okay, the foul of the week. Saul, the HBO Max launch experienced a Tropicana moment when they changed over the HBO Now logo on streaming devices and literally became invisible to subscribers because they didn't tell anybody that the whole logo was going to change, the color of the logo was going to change, and that you wouldn't be able to find your HBO anymore on your device.
I read about this. Obviously, I'm in Canada. I don't get HBO, but I read about this, and I was confused by it. And I was confused by reading a report of it. I can only imagine how confusing it would have been holding your device and trying to find everything you wanted.
Well, I was so confused, I ended up paying for it and realizing I was getting it for free already. So that is the great branding and user experience that there's a lot of people hanging their heads in shame about.
So it's a growth hack.
It's a growth hack.
Well, at least I noticed I paid for it when I could have got it for free, but yeah.
Well, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag FairFailFoul. That's #FairFailFoul. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcasts listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C-Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.